This podcast contains adult language and stories of true crime. If you don't like laughing, crying, or being horrified at the actions of other humans, this podcast is not for you.
Welcome to Resolved Mysteries. This is the show where we rewatch, recap, and give you the latest updates to cases featured on the show Unsolved Mysteries. I'm Alison.
I'm Eliza.
And I'm Karlin.
So, as many of you know, for every review that we receive, we donate $1 to a different organization, and this month's organization is the National Asian Pacific American Women's Forum. Their mission is to build collective power within AAPI women and girls to gain full agency over their lives, families, and communities. Before we get started, we want to shout out some patrons. Eliza, you want to say hi to some patrons?
Oh, yes. Warren T., Roseanne F., Tina Z., Jen O., Kirk L., Jamie T., Robert P., and Christine K. Thanks so much for joining our Patreon and supporting us.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
If you'd like to support us on Patreon, you'll get access to ad-free episodes, 2 additional episodes a month, early access to listener short stacks, and you get some goodies in the mail. So go to patreon.com/resolvedmysteriespodcast. What are we covering this episode?
Oh, I have a Legends case.
Yes, you do.
I've got 2 legends in a row.
You do. Did you know that when you agreed to take KB's segment?
Yeah, I think I did, but I didn't think about it until I was then doing the research that never ends on Legends.
No, I'm sorry. You're just very legendary for the next
So
couple
I'm calling no more Legends for a couple episodes.
That is fair, especially since you saved me from this one.
Exactly.
But it's fine. So it's the legend that you wouldn't think was a legend, but it is, of John Wilkes Booth.
And then I have a Lost Loves about Jim Boumgarden.
And then I've got a Missing Persons segment about Alex Cooper.
Those are both great segments.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. I actually like the John Wilkes Booth segment too, but you know me. I like history stuff, so
yeah,
I was there for it.
All right. Well, I'll tell you all about it.
All right. Let's do it.
Okay. So this is, like we said, the legend of John Wilkes Booth. And before we watched the segment, we were wondering what the legend is. I don't know if we're leaving it. If we're leaving it in episode 1 when Karlin is like, but what is the mystery?
I don't remember.
I don't know if it's in there or not.
I don't remember.
So I didn't know what angle they were going to take, but the angle that they take about John Wilkes Booth, which if you don't know, he is the man that shot Abraham Lincoln. The angle that they're taking is not that he didn't shoot him, but that he didn't die. And this part of the story, I didn't really know a lot about. Like, I didn't really know a lot about how he was captured or said to be captured, so it was sort of new learning for me anyway. And then there's dispute about whether that part's true or not.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, Stack says, on April 14th, 1965, Booth had mortally wounded President Lincoln at Ford's Theater in Washington. The man who had... this is very much Stack's quote. The man who had freed the slaves and given hope to the disenfranchised was gone. Abraham Lincoln, who had preserved the Union through sheer force of will, now belonged to the ages. So, a very eloquent quote. There's a lot of other factors in freeing the slaves besides just President Lincoln, a man, of course. So let's also remember that as we go forward. It was also kind of a political, there's so much about that, but he was not only for emancipation, and he wasn't always for it either. He's a good guy, but he's not like the number one hero of the time, I would say. So after President Abraham Lincoln was assassinated, which I'm sure everyone knows the story, but if you don't, he was in the box at Ford's Theater. John Wilkes Booth came in, shot him in the head, jumped down from the box and shouted, "Sic semper tyrannis, the South is avenged," is what he apparently shouted, because John Wilkes Booth loves having slavery and was against He's a big Confederate guy and against all of what President Lincoln and the North were doing.
A big DB.
A big DB. So after Lincoln was assassinated, 2,000 Union troops searched for the killer. On April 26th at 4 a.m., soldiers surrounded a tobacco barn on Garrett Farm near Port Royal in Virginia. They had information that Lincoln's assassin was inside the barn, which this whole time and anytime we have an old-timey segment, it is so crazy to me that anyone, like when I had the train robber guys. What are their names? Oh, Billy the Kid. Billy, Sundance, whatever.
Billy and Sundance.
The train robber guys.
How do they know what these people look like? It's not like...
Yeah.
It is not like today where you know what every celebrity looks like or there's news immediately looking for this person. It's like, couldn't these people hide so easily? I don't understand.
Yeah, like even if you have seen a photograph, photographs were terrible.
Yeah. And then just like shave your, if they do know like this guy has jet black hair and we know the kind of people that they hang around with, well, shave your head or something. Like it would be so easy to hide, it seems like.
Yeah.
But anyway, so they had been chasing him and got information that he was inside this barn. So they start to set the barn on fire to smoke out whoever was inside. Before they set the barn on fire, a man named David Harold, who was known to be a Booth co-conspirator, came out of the barn. He's 21 years old, holding his hands up, saying, "The man in there is not Booth."
Huh.
So they still decide, they set the barn on fire. They're trying to smoke whoever's inside out. They believe it is Booth. And the soldiers were under strict orders to take Booth alive. But as the troops moved in, a sergeant named Boston Corbett ran up and shot the man who was inside, which is really annoying because all of this would not happen if he had not just killed him right away.
Mm-hmm.
But, I mean, they also could have potentially killed him by setting the barn on fire.
Yeah, for sure. But they could have given it...
Set him on fire, but take him alive.
Yeah. I mean, I think they were hoping he wouldn't want to burn alive, but maybe he'd, pass out from smoke inhalation.
Yeah.
Still, it's like he's going against orders, which is surprising.
Mm-hmm.
Then, 2 soldiers went in and dragged the body from the inferno. And Stack says, quote, "The nation was avenged, or was it?" So then we have one of our talking heads, historian Nate Orlowek, and he says, "There is tremendous physical evidence that proved beyond a doubt that John Wilkes Booth in reality was not killed by the federal government officers as they claimed. In fact, he escaped and lived until January 13th, 1903, when he died in Enid, Oklahoma Territory." So I had never heard this legend before.
No.
But like I said, I hadn't really heard about how Booth was captured afterwards or couldn't remember either.
Mm-hmm.
I remember the barn, but I didn't know that there was anything like this
In question.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Stack sort of lays out for us that there are 2 sides to this debate. The official belief is that Booth did die that day. There are high-ranking military officials who question that story. And then, of course, a lot of people believe that the theories that I'll tell you are, quote, nonsense forms of revisionist history. So Nate Orlowek and another man, Dr. Arthur Chitty, each spent years independently studying the Lincoln assassination. According to Dr. Chitty, they arrived at the same conclusion. He says, quote, "The most persuasive evidence to me at Garrett's barn that the man in the barn was not Booth is the fact that his friend David E. Harold came out of the barn and the first thing he said was, 'That man in there is not Booth.'" So, to me, if that's the most persuasive evidence, then you don't have a strong case, because if you were Booth's friend, wouldn't you come, if one of you are in the barn, and I know they're looking for you, I'm going to say, that person's not Alison, to try to save your life.
Yeah, exactly.
Totally.
That's not proof at all.
No.
His friend's not going to be like, "Yep, he's in there. That's for sure him." So then we see a reenactment, and the man playing Harold runs out of the barn and says, "The man in the barn is not John Wilkes Booth. His name is Boyd." So then we see a naysayer historian, talking head. He believes that Booth was killed that day, and his name's James Hall. And he cites a 40-page statement later made by David Harold to government investigators 36 hours after he was arrested. And he says, Harold referred to Booth 10 times by name when he was discussing what went on in the barn while it was being surrounded by the soldiers. To me, that's conclusive. I can't see where they get the idea that he'd come running out and say, it's not Booth. So then that shows that either David Harold changed his story, or somewhere along the way, word of mouth spread that David Harold ran out and said that man is not Booth.
Okay.
But there's actually no official account of that.
Okay.
And that's how so many of these things come together in a convoluted word of mouth way. And start whole conspiracy theories that people then devote their whole lives to.
Oh my God.
But then Dr. Chitty, who thinks that wasn't Booth's side, said by the time Harold changed his testimony, he was in fear of his life. He had been incarcerated with a canvas bag over his head and just a little hole to be fed through. He was under a terrible emotional strain and was trying to save his neck. And so, therefore, when he thought that he would survive by changing his story, he changed his story.
Wait, they fed him through a hole?
Yes.
I'm confused.
So they fed Harold through a hole in the bag because his head was in this bag.
Oh, my God.
And, yeah, this is during a time when, like, anyone who's harboring Booth or, you know, any co-conspirators are also going to be hanged for their role. One of the other parts that they show us in the reenactment, and we do love an old-timey reenactment, of course, was that a man named Lieutenant William C. Allen, who worked for the United States Secret Service in 1865, he had told his wife, whose name was Helen Allen, that he saw the man at Garrett's farm who had been killed, and that man had red hair. And there's a reenactment of him saying, this man has red hair. This is not John Wilkes Booth. John Wilkes Booth has jet black hair. Then they say, the soldiers around him say, you're never to talk about this to anyone. So then this woman, Helen Allen, in 1937, that's when she tells a journalist that her husband thought that the man was not Booth because he had red hair. So this, again, like, that's from 1865, and then all the way till 1937, the widow says this. You know, who knows? Who knows? But then there are two other eyewitnesses by Union soldiers who say that he did, in fact, the man that was killed did have red hair. So then Nate Orlowek says that the government performed an autopsy and called in a physician who had previously removed a tumor from the back of Booth's neck.
Imagine that surgery.
Oh my gosh. In the 1800s, you're just removing tumors from necks, and Booth lived through that? Miracle.
Yeah, stay away from my spine in that time, please. Thanks.
Truly. So Orlowek says, Dr. John F. May was a Washington surgeon who removed a tumor from the back of Booth's neck a few months before the assassination in 1865. So it was a few months before that. He had just had neck surgery.
Weird.
His statement is now in the National Archives. Like all the other government records on the case, it was held secret for 70 years. Then Dr. Chitty says that Dr. May was pressured into lying. He says, John Frederick May wanted to tell the truth, and he recognized that this was not Booth because he had operated on him before. But it was made pretty clear to him very early on that this better be Booth. And so we have the curious affidavit, which starts out saying, quote, I'm sure this is Booth, and then goes on to say, but it doesn't look like Booth, but this is certainly Booth. Signed, Dr. John Frederick May.
Oh, my God.
So the actor playing Dr. May in the reenactment says, quote, the corpse bears no resemblance to John Wilkes Booth. He is freckled. I don't remember Booth being freckled.
They're like, guys, he was not a ginger.
He's not a freckly ginger. And he really wasn't. Like, when you see I'll talk about Booth's family a little bit, but he comes from a family of actors.
Okay.
And they do have like very dark hair, dark mustaches. And I forget, I think I say later where the dad came from originally, but he wasn't like fair complected.
Okay.
But I also need to talk about this reenactment. You probably don't remember, but the man, the Union soldier who brings in Dr. May in the reenactment to look at the body, looks just like Jesse Plemons, who we love.
I love Jesse Plemons.
Oh, he's in my favorite shows, Fargo, Friday Night Lights, Black Mirror.
Yeah, he's amazing.
Breaking Bad, of course. Yeah, he looks just like him, but the Union soldier has a beard. We'll post a side-by-side. Don't you worry. So Nate Orlowek does make a good point here. He says, now, had the government really believed that the body was Booth's, they would have taken pictures of it, and they would have had many, many hundreds of people identify it.
Oh, I love that.
But the War Department didn't do that. And because of that, he thinks the government knew that the man was not Booth.
That's a great point.
That is a great point. They would be like the way it was with Bin Laden or something.
Yes.
They would want everybody to see the photos of that.
Right.
Huh.
Unless they just didn't think of it. Unless it was that long enough ago that they wouldn't think a bunch of people are going to assume it's not Booth. Like they just don't know that that's a potential thing that could happen, and they just didn't think about it. That's the only reason I can think of for them. Other reason that I can think of.
Right, because there wasn't like millions of people commenting fake. Like there was
Exactly.
Yeah. The Sandy Hook truthers were decades away.
Yes. Although, maybe not. Maybe this is where all of this starts, is there's always been conspiracy theorists.
It's the great-grandpa of conspiracy theory.
So the body was secretly buried in the basement of the old naval prison in Washington. So then you're thinking, okay, this is over. No, then Stack says, but if John Wilkes Booth was not killed at Garrett's barn, then what happened to him? And of course, then I remember what we're here for, what the segment is about. So in 1865, the government moved quickly to close the books on the Lincoln assassination. The trial of John Wilkes Booth's co-conspirators resulted in 4 hangings and 3 life sentences.
Oh.
The details of the conspiracy were classified as secret and hidden away. But some people believe, like I said, that Booth escaped and he lived in the South under assumed names for another 38 years, which also... very impressive. Again, going back to that tumor surgery. You've got surgery on the back of your neck, and you are able to live another 38 years in the 1800s. Okay, so this gets convoluted because there are different theories about who Booth was pretending to be. Okay, so we'll just try our best here. So the first one, in 1907, an attorney from Texas named Finis Bates published a book called, quote, The Escape and Suicide of John Wilkes Booth. In the book, he claimed that he learned the true story of Booth from a man named John St. Helen of Granbury, Texas. So then, back in 1877, when this man, John St. Helen, was seriously ill, he thought he was going to die, and he's on his what he thinks is his deathbed, and we see the reenactment of this, and he made a confession to his friend Finis Bates, and he said that his real name was John Wilkes Booth, that he had killed President Lincoln, and Finis says he doesn't believe him at first. Like record shows or think in his book, he says, like, I thought he was crazy or delusional. I didn't believe him right away. So another thing that St. Helen, who's the man saying he's Booth, says is, if I die, he asks Finis to tell his brother Edwin he was dead. And Booth did have an older brother named Edwin. So in some ways you think, oh, okay, well, how would he know that? Again, this is so long ago. But John Wilkes Booth, like I said, came from an actor family, so Edwin Booth would probably also have been a well-known name.
Oh, okay.
Not necessarily something no one else would know.
Okay.
But I don't know. Would someone pretending to be Booth think to say that? I don't know.
Yeah.
Or, so Nate Orlowek, who's of course studied this book and believes in this theory, says that, of course, Finus Bates thought the guy was crazy. He had been told, like everyone else had, that Booth had been killed in 1865, so he thought the man was just hallucinating. St. Helen said to him, "No, I really am John Wilkes Booth, and now that I've told you my secret, I want to give you the whole story." So he poured out for Bates a very long confession detailing in great detail the kidnap conspiracy, the murder conspiracy, how he got out of Washington, and how he escaped altogether. And that was one interesting piece of learning for me in this, is that John Wilkes Booth, for sure, whether he died in 1865 or not, he for sure didn't act alone.
Yeah.
This was planned by many, many people, and there had been several plots before the Ford Theater shooting.
Yeah.
Too, which I didn't really realize. I always kind of thought John Wilkes Booth, I don't know why, I thought he acted alone out of crazed
That's because that's what
anger.
They teach you that in grammar school. They give a really short version of it, and
yes.
they don't really, I guess they because of time constraints, they can't get into it. But no, it was a complicated plot. There were a lot of players involved, and like you said, it wasn't the first attempt.
Right. And there are beliefs that Andrew Jackson is the one that wanted him killed, St. Helen, who's, again, this man who thinks he's dying, explained to Finus Bates that all the bridges out of Washington were closed after nightfall and heavily guarded. But he had been given a password that allowed him to cross. And that password, some people believe, came from Andrew Jackson or others like him that would have been high enough up to allow him to escape. So according to Nate Orlowek, one of the guards on duty that night, who was a man named Frederick Demond, wrote a letter that supports this account. And Demond says that at about 10 p.m., a captain rode up to the bridge and said, if anyone comes up using a certain password, let them through. The password was TB Road, which is the most boring password of all. Pick a cool password.
Yeah.
St. Helen, saying he's Booth, says that he was able to go up and use the password TB Road and allowed to pass the bridge and get out of Washington that night. But Booth had broken his leg. Some people believe he broke his leg when he jumped down from where he shot Lincoln, but others believe that he maybe broke his leg just in his escape somehow. Okay. But he was definitely injured, which would have made it difficult to run. So people believe he secretly saw a doctor and then continued his escape hidden in the back of a wagon. So he was, of course, a fugitive, but everyone was looking for him. But he made the decision to take personal papers that could identify him as Lincoln's assassin. So he had his diary with him and certain other things that would say, if they were found, that they could only belong to Booth.
Yeah.
So one of the theories is that the people that were helping him saw Union soldiers around this wagon, or, people are watching out as the wagon's going by. They think Union soldiers are around. So they run to the wagon and they yank Booth out of it. And again, this is what St. Helen is saying. Mm-hmm. And when that happened, all of his papers and personal effects fell out of the wagon and he didn't have them with them anymore. So when Booth realized he was able to escape, but he realized that his papers were missing, so he sent someone back for the papers.
Uh-oh.
And when the messenger went to go get them, so the messenger came back without the papers and said that Union soldiers were closing in and he didn't have the papers. So Booth couldn't wait for them and he kept running. Then people believe that it was the man who was sent back to retrieve Booth's papers who was in Garrett's barn. Oh. Who people thought was Booth.
Huh.
Okay.
And it's all convoluted. This man was found with some papers that were Booth's.
Huh.
Or another way to say it is Booth was found with papers that identified him.
Interesting.
But this is a story that people have come up with to say, well, he had Booth's papers because he was sent back to go get them. And he's a known co-conspirator with Harold, so they had to, that's why they were hiding in the barn.
Okay.
If that all makes sense. So then St. Helen has poured all this out. He's explaining it all to Finus Bates. He thinks he's going to die, and he didn't die.
Uh-oh, awkward. Yikes. So, about what I said.
Yes. So he didn't die, and he's probably like, oh shit, I shouldn't have said all of that, whether I am Booth or I'm not. Mm-hmm. Whether this is a big lie or I am Booth, I have to leave now.
Yeah.
So he leaves town. And at this point, Finus Bates is convinced the story is true. But historian James Hall, who I mentioned earlier, again does not believe this. He says, can you imagine a young lawyer talking to a bar owner down in Texas? A gullible young lawyer. So he just fills him full of a great big long story. And later on, Bates, that was the name of this young lawyer, embroidered the story nicely and wrote a book about it. Again, just the way that all these things come together, people weaving in little stories that they hear, then this big story, people putting together puzzle pieces that may not actually fit.
Totally.
But they want them to fit so badly.
Mm-hmm. It is sort of a harmless little activity for old guys, right?
Conspiracy theorizing.
Or, well, just not terrible conspiracy theories like 9/11 and Sandy Hook and Pizzagate.
Not the ones now, but yeah, maybe this one. Right.
Yeah.
These quaint little, is he dead? Is he alive? It doesn't matter, so whatever. You two old little dudes, if you want to go back and forth, that's fine with me. I don't care.
Yeah. Where it gets messy is then when they start to get into the government's covering things up stuff, because that usually grows into way bigger if the government's covering this, which honestly, yeah, of course there are things that we don't know from, we've had military segments where they're silent, but you know, when you can see how it's a slippery slope for lots of people.
And that slope goes all the way to the top.
Yes, and all the way to the bottom. Okay, so now they do show photograph comparisons of John St. Helen and John Wilkes Booth, and they actually do look really similar.
Okay.
When we'll post side by sides, but they look a lot alike. Now, of course, like Karlin said, photographs aren't the crispest thing then, but they have a lot of the same features. So then in 1903, which is when we're told John Wilkes Booth actually died, this man, John St. Helen, died by drinking a glass of wine laced with strychnine that he had put in himself, dying by suicide.
That's a rough way to go.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay, so then, and this part I did not know about, this man, Bates, Finus Bates, who heard this story in 1877, this guy lives, John St. Helen escapes the town because he's like, oh shit, I made a mistake. Bates reads about this man, John St. Helen, dying. And he's like, hey, that's my friend who told me he was John Wilkes Booth. So he goes to Oklahoma. He sees the body and he pays to have the body preserved and mummified. He took many pictures of the body. You can see them. And, which we'll get to later, this mummy traveled around for something like 50 years.
Oh my God.
As the mummified body of John Wilkes Booth that people would pay to go see.
Oh, wow. Life before television was terrible.
Truly. Okay, so in 1931, 6 Chicago doctors examined the mummified body of John St. Helen, who Bates is claiming is John Wilkes Booth, and they recorded their findings. They said that there was a scarred right eyebrow, a crushed right thumb, and a broken left leg, and John Wilkes Booth is known to have had all 3 of those unusual characteristics. It is confusing that they don't say anything about having a tumor removed from the back of the neck of this mummy, because that does seem like it'd be a large scar in 1865.
That's true.
Like, would they just have to cut your whole head off and put it back on to remove a tumor? I don't know. Like, how did they know what they were doing?
I do not know, girl. I think they would just
Horrifying.
kind of like stick in and play around, dig around,
Seriously.
right? This is the neck, right? This is the spine. Like, let's just see.
How did they know?
Let's just get in there.
I mean, we knew things about skeletons and muscles and whatnot.
A lot of what they knew is just from digging around in dead people.
Yeah, exactly. That's how they did it.
It's so gross. I wouldn't even want someone to remove a tumor from the back of my neck today.
Me either. Gosh.
I would. I'd rather die.
Okay, we're getting towards the end of this segment. This is just one of the theories of who John Wilkes Booth could have been, who he could have lived as after he killed Lincoln. Mm-hmm. Then Stack ends by saying, did John Wilkes Booth actually escape Union troops only to kill himself 38 years later in an Oklahoma boarding house? And that does seem, I don't know. Who knows why anyone dies by suicide, but strychnine is a terrible way to die.
It really is.
Worst choice. Bad
And
choice.
you've lived this long. I don't know.
Yeah.
It didn't, it's not like anyone was closing in on him in Oklahoma.
Maybe his tumor came back and he was like, oh, fuck no, not again.
Yeah, not again. They will not chop off my whole head to take this tumor
No,
out.
they are not stitching my head back again. I will not allow it.
Okay, so now you would think that John Wilkes Booth has family that's living still today.
Oh.
And now that we have DNA, the Booth family has agreed to have the man who was officially named as John Wilkes Booth after the Garrett Farm killing dug up, exhumed, so that they can test DNA. Mm-hmm. But a state court has refused permission to do that.
Why?
Which is because I think the government and the court is like, no, that's Booth. We don't need to waste money doing that. We don't need to waste money proving these old dudes wrong. Basically. But I don't know, to me there is enough.
Yeah.
It's there's enough, but also a lot of it is just story. It's not like Nate Orlowek was like, there's so much physical evidence. Not really. There's stories that could explain things.
Yeah.
But yeah, if his family's
If
okay
his
with
family's
it.
okay with it, then just
Right.
do it. Whatever.
And you'd think that they could raise money. I don't know if that's the reason. I'm just, if money's the reason. But you'd think if it was for the court, that the family or the conspiracy people would raise money to prove it.
They would have a GoFundMe in a minute.
Yeah. So that was around 1994 that they were not allowed to dig up the body. So there are actually members of the Booth family who believe that he did escape. So not all the Booth family members think he died that day.
Interesting.
A lot of them think he did escape. But a lot of that is probably due to rumor. Family lore, of course. So some people believe that John St. Helen, who was saying he was Booth, is actually Boston Corbett, who's the soldier who killed Booth, or the man who's maybe Booth, the man who shot Booth through the burning building.
Why?
And people believe this because Boston Corbett's behavior became really erratic. He started to claim that God told him to kill Booth, which makes sense for why he would just run up there and defy orders and shoot him.
Oh.
He was committed to a sanitarium. He escaped. And then after that is when he was in Texas as a traveling salesman and he met Finus Bates. He said he had been living as a man named John St. Helen. He tells this story.
Whoa.
He thinks he's going to die. He gets better. He leaves. He dies by strychnine poisoning.
Wow.
That sort of makes sense to me, that he'd be he's unwell, hearing voices and stuff.
And then decides to become the person that he murdered?
And then decides to say he's John Wilkes Booth. Yes. And then the dying by suicide thing makes more sense to me, too, if that's him versus John Wilkes Booth dying by suicide. Okay, so I'm telling you, there's so much more to this. Of course, you can look up lots and lots of... I'm just going to read this straight from unsolved.com. Under their resolved it says resolved as status.
Okay.
And I'm just going to read this paragraph because it nicely explains like how kind of all this stuff comes together.
Okay.
So in 2007, Edward Steers wrote a book called Lincoln Legends, and he revealed that the so-called proof of Booth's survival had no provenance, and most of the so-called facts had been manipulated or taken out of context to give them substance, kind of like we talked about. The entire legend was based on a combination of conspiracy theories from a man named Otto Eisenschmiel, who blamed the assassination on Edwin Stanton, a completely different person who I didn't research and we didn't hear anything about in this segment.
Okay.
So that's one. Kind of like a rumor starting. Like, Booth isn't even the person.
Yep.
Then it's convoluted with the beliefs of Finus Bates to create a false history from St. Helens claims, and the files of a man named Andrew Potter, who was supposedly in the National Detective Police under Lincoln at the time, and then combined by pseudo-historians like Nate Orlowek, who we saw in the segment.
Okay.
However, the National Archives has no record of this man, Andrew Potter's existence or his membership in the NDP. And the Potter files, which is just like a bunch of his writing, are also filled with numerous discrepancies and historical inaccuracies which call further doubts on the myths of Booth's escape. So this could be a whole podcast series about the conspiracy theories about surrounding Lincoln and how all these things come together, and then, you know, armchair historians are like, oh, I'm going to pick up this piece and this piece and this piece and put it all together. So I thought that like explained it nicely. I did read one thing out of this whole thing that I thought was interesting. No, just kidding. But if we are thinking that Booth died actually did die in that barn, and that was Booth. Okay, there in his pocket, which they didn't mention, were pictures of 5 women. And 3 of the women were actresses, which he probably did know many actresses. But there was also a picture of a woman named Lucy Lambert Hale. And she was reported to be engaged to John Wilkes Booth.
Okay.
But the interesting theory about her is that, and her relationship to Booth, is that her father was a U.S. senator who was the most ardent anti-slavery man in Congress.
Okay.
Which Booth would have hated.
Yeah.
So some historians believe that Booth was only getting close to Lucy to get close to her dad.
Oh, wow.
To maybe kill him or let the dad then get him close to Lincoln.
Whoa.
Like using Lucy. I know.
Oh my gosh.
And John Wilkes Booth was known as like people thought he was the best looking man in the whole country.
Oh, yeah. Said that in the segment. I was like, I had never heard that.
Yeah, he's known as a playboy, sort of. So then, for whatever reason, nothing ever happened with that, thankfully. But because of his relationship with Lucy, Booth was able to come close to the president a few times before he actually shot him at the theater. So then one other picture that is interesting in his pocket is a picture of an actress named Henrietta Irving. She and Booth had met on the stage when they were in a production together. And then apparently they had a fight in the early 1860s. And she really loved him and he didn't.
Okay.
And there is a rumor that they, were drinking and talking together. She's professing her love. He says, I don't love you. She grabs a knife and has it in her hand and is about to stab him, but instead just cuts his cheek and she says, oh my God, I've killed you. And so if she, though, had been able to stab him, he might have died and never ever killed
the
Lincoln.
Butterfly effect.
Oh my gosh.
Yes. Yeah. So that's just kind of interesting. She could have changed
course of
history and
history.
she doesn't even know it. Or didn't even know it.
Or since it was like a number of plots, maybe even if Booth hadn't have done it, they just would have sent someone else at some point. Like maybe Lincoln was always going to be assassinated. They were just going to get to him eventually.
Yeah, and it does seem like that. Like that plot was huge.
They were coming for him.
It's really sad.
Yeah.
Okay, so 2 more things. If you've never seen the movie Lincoln with Daniel Day-Lewis, it is so good.
Is it?
I love it. Oh,
I've never seen it.
yes.
I've never seen it.
It's so good. And his wife had such an interesting life.
Yeah, I did an undergraduate thesis on her for a history class.
Yeah, people believe she was probably had bipolar or something like that, just undiagnosed at the time. She stood trial for different things later because
she was obsessed with seances and those types of people, fortune tellers and that kind of stuff. She was into that a lot.
But she had experienced a lot of heartbreak. Like their son died. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, Lincoln, who it sounded like he was a big caregiver for her and really loved her.
Because everybody knew that there was something wrong with her, some sort of mental health issue with her. So he really kept her in line. Back then, if your husband was assassinated and you were the president's widow, they were basically like, can you get out of the White House? She had to leave everything. She just lost her husband. She was basically kicked out of the White House. I think she had one living son that she ended up living with. She was terrible, very extravagant and terrible with money. So she would spend money on these ornate gowns, these black ornate gowns, because she was in mourning for the rest of her life. She's just a very interesting sort of side note in history.
Yeah, it is. You should, if you haven't seen Lincoln, I'd watch it. Sally Field plays Mary Todd Lincoln.
Oh, interesting.
Okay, and then one other thing, and then we can stop talking about this. A really good podcast, basically a narrative story of the Civil War, but a lot of stories that you haven't heard about. But also it's an acted podcast. It is so good. I'll quickly read the little blurb. Uncivil brings you stories that were left out of the official history of the Civil War, ransacks America's past, and takes on the history you grew up with. We bring you untold stories about resistance, covert operations, corruption, mutiny, counterfeiting, antebellum drones, and so much more. And we connect these forgotten struggles to the political battlefield we're living on right now. The story of the Civil War, the story of slavery, Confederate monuments, racism is the story of America.
Cool.
Yeah, it's really good. And the other interesting thing about Lincoln is that it doesn't end, I'll just say, with his assassination. That film is not part of it. Which is an interesting, I think is a nice decision. Just looking at his life, it does make you think about, oh my gosh, if he could have lived to actually see the Reconstruction, would things have been different? It is a sad story.
Yeah.
So that's all. Who knows who John Wilkes Booth is? Oh yeah, I think the mummy's missing now too.
Oh no.
Which is
missing mummies.
Missing mummy, which would also, you could just test that mummy for DNA, but right around the time DNA came out, the mummy went missing. So,
coincidence or government cover-up?
Who can say? All right, that's it.
Good job. Hey guys, Karlin here to tell you that this episode is sponsored by Real Paper. Real Paper is tree-free toilet paper made from 100% bamboo, and we love a sustainable option. I don't know about you guys, but nothing is more annoying to me than running out of toilet paper, and you've probably been using paper towels for at least a day, let's be honest. Then you finally get to the store, and all the toilet paper options are wrapped in plastic film that is going into the giant plastic island in the ocean. Well, Real Paper is here to solve all those problems. It's got plastic-free packaging. Even the packing tape is made from paper. And you'll never run out of TP again because Real Paper is delivered straight to your doorstep with free shipping, and you get to choose how often you want it delivered. We also love that every roll purchased helps fund access to clean toilets for those in need. And you can use our coupon code MYSTERIES to receive 25% off your first order at realpaper.com. Go to realpaper.com, REELPAPER.com, and use coupon code MYSTERIES, MYSTERIES, RIES to receive 25% off your first order.
Okay, the second segment of Season 4, Episode 2 is a Lost Love segment. It begins with Robert Stack saying, "Imagine that there's someone who looks exactly like you, walks the same way you do, talks the same way you do. And while he's talking to us, there are two giant portraits of a man." And it's very strange.
It's very strange. It looks like a funeral.
Exactly. So I was like, who died? What's going on?
Who died?
Who died?
So he says, "That has been a fact of life for Jim Boumgarden of Byron, Illinois. For years, Jim has been haunted by the specter of a double who seems to be everywhere, or at least everywhere where Jim isn't." Ooh. Drama. Okay. So, at a softball game in Rockford, Illinois in 1984, third baseman Rick Holder comes up to bat and sees his brother-in-law, Jim Boumgarden, pitching the game. Boumgarden should be about 20 miles away at home with his family. So, Rick Holder is interviewed, and he looks nothing like the guy that's playing him in the reenactment.
Nope.
They could not look any different.
Yeah.
The reenactor is this dark-haired guy with a mustache, a ponytail, and Rick Holder in real life looks like me. He's like blonde-haired and blue.
I know. Every now and then, they just don't give a shit. They're just like, whatever guy will work.
I truly feel like being on set for something like that, you must have reenactors fall through a lot.
Oh.
Because it's not a high-paying gig. So I think that when we see that, it's probably a last-minute replacement, and it could truly be like using an extra, someone that was going to be used as an extra.
That's a good call. Maybe that's why.
That's my theory.
Yeah. That makes sense.
Rick says that he was saying hi to Jim, and Jim didn't respond, so Rick decided that he would talk to him after the game. After the game, Rick goes up to this man, shakes his hand, and asks how Cindy and the kids are. And the guy looks at him weird and walks away.
I know.
In the reenactment, the guy looked disgusted.
Yeah.
But, like, to not even say anything.
Never does he ask. Yes.
Never does he ask. Yeah, and we'll get to that. So 5 years later and a few miles away, Jim Boumgarden's father, Ernie, was leaving a doctor's office when he thought he saw his son.
He was so cute.
I know, he was adorable. Jim Boumgarden says that his dad was yelling, "Jim, Jim," at the guy to get his attention. The man totally ignored him and then got into a car that was very similar to the one that Jim drove and then drove off. But in the reenactment, he doesn't ignore him. He turns, looks at him, and shakes his head and gets in the car.
Yes.
Yeah.
So people are screaming Jim at this man, presumably, and he has no cares. He has no fucks to give about it. He's like, "I'm not even interested in this. I'm the least curious person in the world." So Jim says that means that now there are two people who know him very well who were both fooled, especially his dad. Jim theorizes that if his dad was fooled, the man must look almost identical to him. So Stack says that Jim spent his childhood in a suburb of Rockford, Illinois, and he was adopted. When Jim was 11 and visiting his grandparents in Rochelle, Illinois, he was approached by a group of neighborhood boys who were calling him Billy. Could you imagine how weird that is? Like, you're 11 years old and a bunch of kids are like, hey Billy.
Well, I've had this exact experience where someone approached
Really?
me, launched into a full conversation, and I had to, like, actually stop them and be like, I am not the person that you think I am.
So could so when did it switch from you were thinking, oh my gosh, how do I know this person? How do I know this person? To knowing, oh, they think you're someone else.
It was when I was in school. I think it was when I was in community college, and they just like approached me and like started talking about like a project. I was so confused and they were like close to me, like they knew who I was. And finally I was just like, I have no clue what you're talking about. I'm not. And I was like, my name's Karlin. And they were like, you're not blah, blah, blah. And I was like, no. And they were like, you look exactly like blah, blah, blah. And I was like, well, I'm not.
Also,
it
so
was,
someone
like, so
also that
awkward.
went to that community college looked exactly like you.
So
that is
doppelganger.
weird.
And it was like an older guy. Like, it was so weird. He was fully convinced I was another person.
Whoa,
Yeah.
that's so strange. Well, they say everybody has a doppelganger.
And yours is right at the same community college as you.
Apparently.
So they also show a photo of Jim at around that age, and he looks like he's out of the Donna Reed show or Leave It to Beaver.
Oh my God, yes.
Quintessential. It's like Howdy Doody. Like
Yes.
a quintessential little 50s boy.
Totally.
So after high school, Jim joined the Army and served in Vietnam. In 1978, Jim married Cindy Holder and had 2 children. They lived near Rockford, Illinois. Often in Rockford, people that Jim didn't recognize would greet him in an unusually friendly way. He sort of brushed it off as nothing until people would see him in places where he wasn't. Stack says finally on Christmas Day, 1991, the strange encounters culminated at a mini-mart just 5 blocks from Jim's house. Shirley Hurleen was behind the cash register.
Oh, yeah.
Hurleen, I love that name.
Yeah.
Shirley Hurleen. Hurly burly Shirley Hurleen. Hurleen says that she was working and a man came in who she assumed was Jim. He looked like him, walked the same, and talked the same. Same mannerisms. Shirley then says that within minutes, Jim and Cindy walked into the mini-mart. So Shirley asks Jim if he forgot something, and he says, no, why? And she says, well, you were just here a few minutes ago. And he says, it's the first time he's been there today. So Shirley looks at Cindy and asks if Jim is kidding. And she says, no, it was the first time that he'd been out today. Shirley says that somebody just came in who looked just like him. Jim's response to her when she's like, did you, like, you were, he was like, no. He was like clearly really irritated. So strange.
But also it's a weird response because it's like, if this is now the 3rd time you've heard about this, wouldn't you be like, oh my gosh, he was just here. I want to go see him. I want to see if he's here.
No. I've been in my jammies all day. It's Christmas. Jim says that if he'd been just 15 minutes earlier, just maybe they could have ran into each other and met each other face to face. He says, quote, how awesome that would have been to see yourself. I just think that's sweet. 3 weeks later, Jim's wife Cindy was visiting Jim's grandmother Sophie. Sophie grew quiet when Cindy told her about the odd occurrence at the mini-mart. Jim's father, Ernie, had died a few months earlier. Sophie said that Ernie had told her that Jim had a brother, a twin. Cindy Boumgarden says that Sophie told her Ernie didn't like keeping it a secret, but if Jim never knew his brother, then he would never miss him. Unless his twin brother is living in a 20-mile radius and totally making him feel insane.
Yeah, seriously.
Also, if Ernie saw a man that looked exactly like Jim and the man wasn't Jim, why did Ernie then go to Jim and say, hey, I saw your twin?
Yes.
Why would he encourage this mystery if he didn't want Jim to know? So strange. So Jim says that he is excited that he is looking for a twin brother. Jim obtained a family history from the adoption agency, and they show a bit of it, and it says, birth family history of James Boumgarden. You were born 3/29/47 after a forceps delivery. At birth, you weighed 7 pounds 9 ounces and measured 48 centimeters. On 4/16/47, you were discharged to a foster home until 4/19/47, when you were placed initially in foster care with your adoptive parents. Your birth mother was age 33, 5 foot, 130 pounds with long blonde hair. She completed 1.5 years of high school and was a slow learner. She had held many jobs and prior to the pregnancy was employed in a factory. After your birth, she worked cleaning houses. Her mother was deceased, dying at age 52 after gallstone surgery. She was 5 foot tall and of heavy build, with blonde hair and blue eyes. Previous to her death, she also had diabetes and gallbladder trouble. She was of English descent. Your birth mother's father was of French descent, 5'6", of average build with dark brown hair and blue eyes. He was an electrician. And this is a strange paragraph. Your birth mother was the middle child of 3 children. A sister, age 36, was 5'6" tall of medium build. She was married and had 2 children, ages 12 and 19. A 3rd child had drowned at age 14.
Right.
Oh.
So it's pretty wild that the adoption agency would provide him all of this information, but no names. Mm-hmm. They know so much about the family. I mean, so they know the height and the build of the sister. They know that it's so interesting.
But nothing about having a twin either in that, right?
Nothing about having a twin. Nothing about it. So, like I said, no names were given, but his birth mother had a nephew who drowned at the age of 14. Desperate for details, Jim spent hours in the library until he found the story in a 1945 newspaper. Finally, Jim had a family name, Hieronymus, which is a fabulous name.
The best.
I also want to say that watching Jim go through microfiche in that little microfiche room is truly my dream.
Yeah.
I used to do that all through middle school. I was such a nerd for microfiche. I would just look at old newspapers, sit in that tiny room and go through old newspapers. I loved the microfiche room. I fucking loved it. I had such a warm, fuzzy feeling. I was that's my safe space, the little microfiche cubbies. So, through the phone book, Jim located a woman by the name of Hieronymus who lived 20 miles away. Jim had found his Aunt Myrtle, his birth mother's sister, and the mother of the boy who had drowned in 1945. Myrtle showed Jim a photograph of his mother, Hazel, for the first time. And she told him that Hazel had died just 3 years earlier, which is a heartbreaker.
Oh my gosh.
I hate when that happens in these stories.
Yes.
It's so upsetting.
No.
Myrtle told Jim that Hazel had cut herself off from the rest of the family and that they had known nothing of his birth or the birth of his twin brother. Myrtle also told Jim that he had an older sister as well. Myrtle had a ton of information. It was wonderful that he found her.
Yeah.
Jim says now it's even more of a mystery because he has to find 2 instead of 1. But he says he's determined and that he's going to find them one way or another. Jim's mother's maiden name was Hazel Georgetta de Beaufort, and eventually she married a man named Carner, who was also deceased. Jim says he won't be satisfied until he finds his brother and sister. So Jim and his brother were born in Cook County, Illinois on March 29th, 1947. His brother, who may be named Billy, was adopted by a family in Rochelle, Illinois. Their older sister was also born in Rockford at St. Anthony's Hospital in October or November of 1945. So there's an update that says after the story aired, Jim was reunited with his sister, Judy Sullivan, who had no idea she had a brother. So I didn't think about this, but she was only 2 when her mother was pregnant and gave birth. So of course she would have no idea that these boys even existed.
Totally. Yeah, it adds up.
And this is the saddest. Jim died about a year after the reunion with his sister. He never found his brother, but his family would still like to find him and any other relatives. Oh, my gosh.
It also, real quick, it also makes you wonder why'd she give them up? If she was keeping the sister? Or if she, and so it makes you wonder, would she have kept them if it was just one of them?
Yeah.
Was 2 more mouths to feed a lot, but just one. But I guess then she could have just kept one of them. I don't know. The whole thing is so heartbreaking, especially when you already have a child. You know what that feels like. Ugh, yeah.
And I also wonder why she cut off contact with the rest of the family.
Yeah.
What happened there? So I found an article from the Daily Chronicle from September of 1992, and it's just a little bit about the segment. Quote, from Unsolved Mysteries, we had quite a few callers who say they have sighted him in the Sycamore area, Jim Boumgarden said about his brother. I've never been to Sycamore in my life, as far as I know. Cindy Boumgarden said that 5 or 6 of the callers have said they think they have seen Boumgarden's brother at various auctions and flea markets or walking through stores. So I guess he loves a good deal.
Mm-hmm.
Quote, nobody knows him by name, but they say that they have just seen him, she said.
It's Billy.
Boumgarden, whose real name is James Russell de Beaufort, said his story began March 29, 1947, when he was born at the Cook County Salvation Hospital. From there, we were put into an adoption agency in Rockford, and from there, we were put into a foster home in Rochelle. He said that he and his brother had remained together in the Rochelle home for 6 months. Quote, she was an elderly lady, and she called up the adoption agency and told them she just couldn't handle 2.
Oh.
Soon afterwards, Boumgarden was taken by a foster family in Holcomb, just north of Rochelle, and eventually adopted by that family. So I found before I get to this comment, there are people out there who don't think that Jim Boumgarden even had a brother. They think that either this was a hoax for some reason, or that he had mental health issues and was imagining this. But as we'll see, that's just not true. I don't know how that like narrative is still being pushed forward because there's, evidence that that's not true.
Yeah.
So I found a really helpful comment on Sitcoms Online from Jim Boumgarden's son. So he says, my father, James E. Boumgarden, celebrated his birthday March 29th, 1947. However, some documents found showed his birthday was March 26th, 1947. And he was raised in Rochelle and Paynes Point, Illinois. So he has bullet points. So it's just additional information, which is just a dream. As kids, my father and his brother may have been living near each other, but the twin may have been adopted by another family away from the area, or his current family had moved him away from the area, or he may have never been adopted and just moved from home to home. As an adult, he may have just come to visited the area and visited an old friend or the adopted family, which is why he would be seen, but then nobody would know who he was.
Right.
This is interesting. He says, at the baseball game, my Uncle Rick didn't know about the twin at the time, as it was years before my father started looking. However, he couldn't recall the team or date that he played against. But it was such a big deal. I can't imagine not remembering, at least, if not the date, definitely the team that you played against. Because it was a company softball team. How many teams are there?
Yeah, look at a calendar.
Exactly.
So wait. So sometimes was it people seeing who they thought was Jim, right? Was it ever people seeing Jim and being like, oh, you're this person? Okay.
Well, just with the kids.
Just the kids, but not when he was an adult. Right,
Not when he was an adult. And the people who say that this is not real say, how come the only people who see this guy are people that know Jim? But that isn't essentially true because
we only know about, we only know
what
about
I'm saying? Well, I mean, I guess, but that's not really the point. Of course, we'd only be talking to people that know Jim because they're the only people that
would
know that he looks like him. Yeah, so I'm just like,
that's
oh my
dumb.
God. Yeah. So the Sun says that UM contacted me back in 2007 before they started airing the update on Spike. I did have updates for them, but they didn't pursue the update. My parents did go to all the libraries and high schools in the area searching yearbooks for a kid his age. But as I stated above, the twin likely moved away from the area before high school. My father had a doctor confirm that he had an identical twin before he knew that he had a twin because the doctor told him that he was missing an organ.
What?
Yeah. And then he says, sorry, I don't remember which one. I can update this part later when I find out. And he said, so that means that the twin probably had the organ.
Is that a common thing?
Well, listen, it says, this is common in the type of twin he was. They were basically one step away from being Siamese twins. Wow. So his half-sister, Judy S., was given up for adoption because she had a tumor at birth.
Oh, no.
Her unmarried, in parentheses, very important for that time period, mother was unable to pay for the surgery.
No.
So the first couple that paid for the surgery got to adopt her.
Oh.
Their mother was given no choice or no rights.
Oh.
Wow.
Oh, my God.
My father and twin were considered, quote, unadoptable because of a possible heart defect and possible, quote, mixed race.
Okay.
She was forced into giving these kids up because she was unmarried. Because of this, they were placed on the, quote, black market. Documents were sealed, maybe even changed too. I guess this was as a punishment to his mother so that she could never find them. He says there was an update that Spike didn't air. A good friend of my father's who runs a store in the area said that he thought he saw a ghost when a man walked into the store. When he confronted him about the case, the man said he didn't want to have anything to do with the family and then walked out of the store, got in his truck, and left. My father's friend tried to stop him, but the, quote, twin wasn't willing to talk. This also confirms some of the other reports my family received saying the same thing. If the twin doesn't want to be contacted, then there isn't much that we can do. Hopefully he will change his mind someday and contact me. It isn't hard to find me online. If he has any kids, they would be my cousins and about as close as you can get to being a half-brother or sister. I would like to thank everyone who has done some research online for this case. Because of the adoptions, sites like Ancestry or even Facebook probably wouldn't get you very far unless we knew, quote, Bill's adopted last name. And then another commenter, Jennifer S., said, there was another part to the update of the story. Apparently, Jim's older sister that he reunited with was able to reunite with a younger sister of theirs. But Jim died before she could introduce him to their younger sister. And I think that Jim's son makes a good point. The people who initially thought this was a hoax were saying, well, if somebody comes up to you and they keep calling you by a different name, don't you have any follow-up questions? Aren't you wondering? But if the guy doesn't want to be found, he's not going to engage. He's just going to walk away.
That makes sense.
It seems like this person very much did not want to engage with the family, did not want to engage with anyone who knew Jim for whatever reason, you know? So he didn't want to be found. Yeah, so that's it. I think it's a sad case. I feel so bad for the mother. And I feel so bad that Jim passed away before he was able to find him.
Yeah. It's nice that he found the sister, though.
Yeah.
It is. Mm-hmm.
And it sounds like he wouldn't have found him anyway, even if he had lived.
Exactly.
Because the guy doesn't want to be found.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Good job. I know that one was really weird and confusing. I kept being like, wait, who is thinking they see which one? And at first I thought it was like a mysterious thing, like, isn't it weird? Like a true doppelganger situation. But then it was an actual twin.
Yeah.
Well, and then when I got online and people were like, it's a hoax, I was like, okay, I'm all for a hoax. But why in the world would this man concoct this cuckoo banana story and get the local mini-mart owner involved?
No.
Or why would this man walk around pretending to be his twin in front of his friends and family? It's just all very, very strange.
Yeah.
So there is nothing that the internet doesn't believe in, I tell you.
Totally.
Or does believe in. It just swings.
Yeah.
It's polar.
Totally.
But what a weird thing to, like, take a stand on.
To, like, zero in on, exactly.
Yeah.
And people were kind of mean. They were really aggressive. And I'm like, I doubt that this is a hoax, everyone. Calm down.
And he doesn't come across like an attention seeker or something like that. Like, what?
Oh,
So weird.
Weird.
All right, this is the missing persons segment about Alex Cooper. And we start the segment over an adorable photo of Alex Cooper. He's playing the guitar and the harmonica at the same time with one of those, like, things that holds the harmonica on your face. Mm-hmm. I don't know what those are called. Stack tells us that Alex Cooper of Cranbrook, British Columbia, Canada, he does have to tell us that that's in Canada, was an accomplished musician. More photos reel by of Alex playing his guitar and singing, and Stack tells us that Alex was folksy and down-to-earth. He was a family man who loved fishing and camping, and with his wife Margaret and their 5 grown children and 3 grandchildren. And they reel by a lot of cute family photos as this is happening. Alex was a businessman in the cleaning industry from 1974 to 1983. In 1986, Alex started a new job as a salesman and began to spend some of his time on the road. Stack says everyone agreed Alex Cooper was the last person you'd expect to find at the center of a mystery. On the morning of April 4th, 1987, Alex's daughter Lila and her husband Pete left Cranbrook to go shopping. So I don't know if, like, where they lived was, like, the boonies or something, because they had to travel. It was a 3-hour drive to where they were going to go shopping.
Oh.
But Alex's daughter, Layla, says that they left early, about 7 or 7:30. And as they're driving along, Pete, her husband, points out that he sees Alex's car on the side of the road. He's like, "Isn't that your dad's car?" And she's like, "It was obviously my dad's car." So they make a whole point to explain why they wanted to turn around and go see what was up. But, like, I feel like anyone would do that. So they stop and they turn around and they drive back to the car. And he wasn't in it, but she said they didn't think anything of that. They just kind of walked by it and assumed because it was next to a river that he was down at the river. They go down over the embankment to the river. They don't see him anywhere. Lila is like calling his name. He's just nowhere in sight.
And that river is rushing. So
it is a rushing
river.
It
was kind of scary. Like maybe he got swept up or something.
Yeah. So she says when they got back to their car, she started getting a weird feeling in her stomach. And she started to think, this is really weird. Mm-hmm. And Stack explains that because Alex had a heart condition, Lila started to get a little bit worried. So she called her mom. Margaret had not seen her husband for more than 24 hours. Which I'm like, Margaret,
come on, honey.
Honey, why aren't you telling anyone?
Especially since that is supposedly very out of character for him. And the family's so close. What was she thinking?
I know. I do not understand.
Yeah.
I don't know why she didn't even at least call her daughter and be like, I'm a little worried. I haven't seen him in a while. Margaret says that she started to get really scared. Lila suggested that she go check the hotel that was nearby, and then after that, they would check the hospitals, and if they didn't find him then, that they would go to the police. So they do a reenactment of Lila and Pete talking to the police officer, and he asks if they know where Alex was going, and Pete's like, yeah, he was going on a sales trip. Like, this is part of his business. He sells restaurant supplies. So Larry Wiltshire of RCMP tells us that there were no footprints or any other physical evidence around the vehicle. He says the vehicle was locked. There was a set of clothes in the vehicle and some fishing tackle. He says nothing they found in the vehicle would suggest foul play. In the reenactment, Margaret plays herself, and she looks just as heartbroken and distraught as if it's happening right now.
So sad.
Oh, so sad.
It is one of the saddest interviews and reenactments I think we've ever seen.
Yeah.
So they show her talking to the RCMP, and they're telling her that they need to take the car for evidence. And in the reenactment, she's like, you have to take the car. And they're like, we have to take the car. And she says, I felt very lost seeing the car go away, and I wanted to make them leave it. I felt that if the car was there, he would probably come back and get into it, and this would end it. Which, like, I totally understand that feeling.
Yeah.
Like, it makes things so much more real when you start removing a person's belongings.
Yeah.
So Margaret is just speaking in, like, the softest, most broken voice, and she says, but they took the car away, and he didn't come back. Stack says the police had launched an extensive land and air search, but Alex had vanished. The family was confused and devastated, and they continued their search. They learned that on the day that Alex disappeared, he had eaten lunch at a restaurant less than a mile from where his car was found. Margaret says Alex had a very bad habit in that he carried his money in a roll in his front pocket. And if he was going to pay for anything, out came the roll, and he took off what he needed and popped it back in. And that worried me a great deal afterwards. Stack says that Margaret feared the worst. She worried someone had robbed Alex, killed him, and dumped his body in the wilderness. So they do like a reenactment of that theory of like someone being like, hey, can I hitch a ride with you? And, you know, showing how that could have maybe come about. Lila had imagined a totally different course of events. She thought that her dad had fallen into the water. She says that she could imagine him going down to the water to see about fishing, you know, because there was the tackle box in the car. And maybe he accidentally fell in, or he had a heart attack and fell in, which they do a reenactment of that as well.
Oh, gosh, I don't remember that.
Yeah.
It is, I don't think it's necessary to the segment, but it's really sad and scary.
I must have been looking away. Ugh.
Stack says that the police continued to find nothing, and the media picked up the story. The media coverage stirred up another theory. Larry Wiltshire says that after the broadcast, they had a lot of people call in saying that they'd seen someone with a similar description to Alex Cooper as far as height, weight, clothing, hitchhiking in the area where his vehicle was. He says the investigators' theory was that he just left on his own, quote, for whatever reasons we have no idea. So obviously there must have been nothing wrong with the car because there was they never made the thing of like, he's hitchhiking because his car broke down.
Right.
So it was immediately to he left. So Stack walks us through that theory. If Alex had left of his own free will, why did he leave his heart medication and credit cards at home? Why would he have taken only the clothes he was wearing? Margaret says It was suggested that maybe he just staged the disappearance and ran away from us. I wasn't able to accept that at all. Alex wasn't the type of man who would be capable of creating that kind of pain for his family. Lila says, he was the best father anybody could ever want, and he loved us all. He was funny, and he was sincere, and he was honest. And you know, if I'm proven wrong, I guess I'll have to eat my words, but I believed everything he ever told me. Stack says the Cooper family suffered through an entire year with no word from Alex and eventually had to face the painful reality that he was gone forever. Margaret Cooper petitioned the Supreme Court at British Columbia to have her husband declared legally dead, and her request was granted. Stack tells us that when Margaret tried to obtain Alex's birth certificate, which is something that you need to declare someone dead, she made a chilling discovery. A birth certificate had never been issued in Alex's name. Stack says that, in fact, prior to his marriage to Margaret in 1952, there were no official records of Alex Cooper. No high school transcripts, no military papers, no medical history. Stack says it was as if Alex Cooper did not and had not ever existed, which is just the weirdest thing.
It's very weird. This poor family.
Because up until this point, I'm like, oh my gosh, something terrible happened to
Yes.
this man.
Yeah.
I mean, I won't say anything, but, like, you can see as their interviews are going on that they're like, no, you could never lie to us. And then, well, yeah, obviously you didn't tell us the whole truth. You know what I mean? Like, it just kind of slowly devolved.
Yes.
You could see it happen in front of you. So their trust fails. So weird.
Totally. The evolution of the interviews I actually called out too. Because it's so... We'll get to it. Okay. So Margaret says, finding no record of him made me feel very mixed up, unsure of myself and of him, because I guess I had to really admit for the first time that he hadn't been completely honest with me and things. Lila says it made her wonder about her father as far as identity, but it didn't make her wonder about him as a person. Quote, because if he'd have been Joe Smith, I'd still love him, which I thought was a really sweet sentiment. Like, she still knew this man for 35 years as Alex Cooper, her dad. Over photos of Cooper at the end of the segment, Stack's voiceover asks, who was Alex Cooper? Why had he assumed an alias and, in essence, lived a lie for more than 30 years? And most important, was he still alive? If so, why had he chosen to disappear?
Yeah.
And then it cuts to Stack in person, talking, not voiceover, so it's obviously, like, added in afterward. Stack says, for 4 long years, the Cooper family lived in a constant state of uncertainty. Then, on May 7th, 1991, the mystery of Alex Cooper began to unravel. Halfway across the country, in Toronto, another man was reported missing. He was also a traveling salesman. His name was David Cooper, and he bore an uncanny resemblance to Alex Cooper. Stack says the man known as David Cooper had lived in a boarding house in Toronto for nearly a year. Every week, he would venture out to a new community, selling meat products to families via the telephone. Such a weird time.
Thank you.
No, thank you.
Stack continues that during one of his business trips, a friend had reported him missing. The police searched Cooper's room and found this photograph, and then they show it, and it is the same photo of Alex Cooper that we saw at the beginning of the segment. Stack says that David Cooper and Alex Cooper were one and the same. So then we go back to interviews with the family that are a little bit later. Lila says, holding the photograph, it was like all her prayers were answered because he was alive. Quote, but I didn't have him. He was there, but he wasn't there. Margaret sadly looks like her interview is just the most honest thing I've ever seen. She looks over at the interviewer and says, I had my 39th wedding anniversary not too long ago by myself. I live in limbo.
Oh my gosh.
And so I just want to break down what this family has just gone through. Their beloved father and husband is missing. Just up and vanishes with no indication of anything being wrong or any reason for this to have happened. They go through the terror and the heartbreak of him being missing with no idea why. And they're assuming the worst scenarios of what could have possibly happened to him. Then this goes on for so long that they have to assume that he's dead. So then they go through the whole grief process of he's dead. Then 4 years later, they find out he is alive. So you're like astonished, relieved, elated, I'm sure. And then the confusion and betrayal and anger that must come with knowing that he's been alive and he didn't contact you.
Yeah.
He left
How
you
do you
on purpose.
even process that?
Yeah.
It's just wild. So Sergeant Aubrey Dove of the Toronto Police Force says that on May 29th, when Cooper returned home to the boarding house, he could tell that the police had been there. He could see the dusting of fingerprints all over the walls and other items in his apartment. So there's a reenactment of Cooper running down the stairs, and he asks the landlord what's happened to his room. So the lady just tells him that he's been reported missing and that the police are trying to find him. By the time police made it to the boarding house, Cooper had, of course, disappeared again. Sergeant Dove says, "We have a person that has something to hide, to the point that he'd walk away from the family he's been with for the last 35 years.
Yep.
So it has to be something that's very serious, or at least he believes is very serious." Lila Cooper says, "I'd love to get him back. I want to give him a real big hug, and then I kind of want to give him a kick in the butt, and then another big hug, but I'd love to have him back." So it's obviously she hasn't even fully processed what's happening yet.
Yeah.
Because she's still oh, I want my dad back. You know?
Yeah.
Margaret says, "If he's running, I don't know why he's running, but it's time he quit. He's got this family that cares about him, and if he's out there living amongst strangers, he should rethink this thing. We deserve it, and so does he." So, again, I think these are some of the best interviews UM has ever gotten. This family is just
So honest. Yeah.
Stack says, "Shortly after this story aired, a viewer in Hamilton, Canada, recognized Alex Cooper and immediately called authorities. During the questioning, the mystery of his life began to unravel." And then we have an update screen. Alex Cooper told police his true name was Albin Arnasault. In 1948, he was accused of robbing an office of the Canadian Pacific Railroad, where he was employed at the time. And then we have an interview with Alex Cooper.
Yes, he's there.
Did anyone expect?
I gasped.
I did too.
I was so happy to see his little face. I was just like, what is going on?
Yeah.
I couldn't believe
have
it.
we ever had a missing person be in the segment.
Oh my God. I couldn't believe it. I was,
Oh my gosh.
I was elated to see him alive.
Yeah.
I could not believe.
And then I was like, what did you do?
Totally. And you're like, okay, spill it. So his demeanor right off the bat is sheepish and embarrassed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's very sad. I'm just shocked that he wanted to do the interview.
I know.
Yeah.
He says, quote, "I was young and I panicked and I said to myself, there is no way I'm going to be taking the fall for this because I didn't do it. I took off at that time and I became Alexander Cooper at that point."
It does make you wonder what he had told Margaret when they first got married about his family. Because she would have never met his parents or anything.
Yeah.
Yeah, people talked about that on the message boards quite a bit. Because they were like, wouldn't she want to know his parents' names and blah, blah, blah. But my guess is that he made up lies about all of it and was probably my parents have died. And I have no siblings.
Really hard to trust someone after that.
Oh my goodness. So he becomes Alex Cooper. 3 years later, he marries Margaret. He had no idea that any criminal charges against him had probably been dropped, and for more than 35 years, his true identity remained secret. As Alex's 65th birthday was approaching, his past began to catch up to him. Alex explains that he was due for pension and you were required to submit a birth certificate, and Alex knew that he couldn't give them one. He said he knew for months that it was coming, but he couldn't bring himself to tell his family, so he walked away. Quote, "It was a snap decision and it was wrong."
Oh, gosh.
Stack says that 2 days after being questioned by the authorities, Alex came back to BC and was reunited with his family after more than 5 years. Margaret says, "We were a very close family. This has been devastating for all of us, including Alex. I'm really hoping that we can work through this and put it back together. If not the way it was, maybe something better.
Ugh.
Tearfully, Lila says, we can't pick up where we left off because things have changed. Ugh. But we're going to start fresh and take it a day at a time. Alex, I know. Which is where, again, you see that evolution of, like, they have now processed that he abandoned them. So Alex says, I don't deserve for anybody to accept my apology. What I've done, abandonment of your family, to me is one hell of a crime. And the biggest job for me will be to make amends, and I would say it'll probably take me the rest of my life. The honesty.
I know. It's great.
It's amazing. It's great television.
It really is, yeah.
So, yeah, like I said, by this point, they've realized it's not just, okay, Dad's back. It's we have to, like, rebuild the last 35 years. So the research. There's not a ton out there about this case, partially, I think, because it's Canadian, so I'm not finding as much stuff because of that. But we also get most of the story on UM.
Yeah.
I just want to talk about, like, what people on the message boards are talking about. So the first thing that a lot of folks are wondering about is if Alex was truly innocent of any crimes. To change your identity and start a new life over a crime you did not commit?
Yeah.
Oh, I guess. That makes sense, right?
Like,
and what was the crime again?
Robbery. He was working for a railroad.
Okay.
And I don't know what the items were, but...
He robbed the office or something, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he's saying, I didn't do it. Okay.
He's saying he did not do it.
But you're right. It is a little odd to take off and go on the lam for decades for something you didn't do.
Yeah.
Yeah. So people were kind of like, are we sure he didn't do anything? Or some people were like, maybe he wasn't directly like the robber, but he was somehow involved in something. Or people speculated maybe he had committed another crime and he thought, if they're coming to look at me for this, they're certainly going to find out about that. Or whatever. But still, it's just so weird to me that he would make that decision. And I mean, he was young.
Yeah.
Everybody's dumb when they're young. But,
yes.
So as we know, Alex not only changed his identity once and started a new life, he left an entire life and family of 35 years to go on the run again.
Yeah.
Not because he had any indication that the police were going to find him, but because he realized he couldn't file for his pension?
Yeah.
So a lot of people on the message boards were like, why couldn't he just, like, tell his family that he made this dumb mistake and, like...
It's so weird.
Yeah.
But I can understand that after lying for 35 years about who you are to your entire family, everyone around you, you've built this entirely new life. It probably sounds very terrifying to tell them the truth.
Yeah.
But I'm just like, is that embarrassment really worse than the pain of leaving your entire family behind at 65 years old?
Yeah, I know.
And clearly he's not thinking about the pain they're going to experience, which he also didn't think enough about with whatever family he left the first time, too, like his parents or whatever.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I was like, maybe it was the added pressure of, like, so he's 65, he's trying to retire. He needs his pension to support him and his wife for the rest of their life. And if he thinks he cannot do that, he's panicking extra because of that.
And these are the kind of men that commit familicide. Like, these are the kind of situations, not the kind of man, but this is the kind of situation where they just cannot tell their family about this money trouble that they're having, so they decide to kill them. Thankfully, he left instead of doing that, and he probably never would do that, but this is that same situation.
Yeah.
That's a really good point.
Yeah.
If there's guys out there that are willing to kill their families over this kind of scenario, this isn't that wild.
Then rather than have to tell them the truth... Yeah, it's crazy.
That's true.
Very true.
So, and then a lot of people on the message boards are like, didn't he know about the statute of limitations? And then some people are like, guys, this is Canada. We don't do that. But still, he should have known that, like, he probably would not be pursued for a crime from 35 years ago that he didn't commit, according to him. I don't know enough about Canadian law to know anything about how they do stuff, but yeah, everyone's just really focused on, like, he should have known that they wouldn't have come after him for this crime at this point. But maybe he really did not know that. Maybe he really just still thought, they're going to catch me, I'm going to go to jail.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I really can't decide how I feel about Alex in this one. I think that the life he led with his family was real. Like, all of that was real. He loved them. I think he was a good husband and a good father. So either he did have something actually shady in his past, or he just really could not face telling his family the truth.
It's so wild.
And one of the sitcoms online users was like, this is a great example of how a lie can snowball. Like,
Yeah.
as a young man, he makes this decision, like, I don't want to get caught. And it turns into this fraud of a life. It's so wild.
It's true. It's very true.
So next, of course, we have to wonder, like, what happened after this? Like, was the family okay? Were they able to patch it back up?
Yeah.
So one sitcoms online user named The Gov was able to find, it was either like an obituary or just a eulogy type writing that one of his kids had done when he passed away. So that's really the main thing that gives us some insight as to what happened for the rest of their lives. So Margaret passed away in 1996, and Alex passed away in 2007. So I'm not sure which child wrote this obituary, but it the whole time says dad. It refers to him as dad.
Okay.
And it does have brief mention of Alex's, like, actual beginnings of his life as Albin Arsenault. Although they don't use that name, but they say, like, his parents' names with the last name Arsenault and his real siblings' names.
Wow.
So eventually that all did come out. Between the 5 children, Alex had a lot of grandkids and even some great-grandkids by the time he passed away. At some point after Margaret died, Alex had a new relationship with a woman named Cecile Bolduc. And the tribute/obituary references her as his partner. So I don't think they ever got married. But he was with her many years until she died. And it said, Dad cared for her with great kindness, affection, and tenderness. And then there's reference to his special girls, which he affectionately called his daughters. So I think these were Cecile's children that he basically, like, became the dad of as well.
Okay.
So the whole thing is just written so sweetly and lovingly, mentions everything they loved about him, and it's really obvious that, like, he did repair that relationship and ended up, they just had the rest of their lives together as a united family. So that's nice.
Oh, that's so nice. That makes me so happy.
Yeah, me too. And at the very end it says, though our father taught us many lessons, the greatest of these were our understanding of hard work and the importance of forgiveness. The man that he was will resonate with all who knew him long after he is gone.
Oh, I'm so glad. I'm so glad that they didn't fall apart after that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just still want to know. I want to hear about, like, his real brother or sister watching that same Unsolved Mystery segment and being like, oh my gosh, that's our brother and he's missing again. He's left.
I know.
Totally, yeah.
Like, was he ever reported missing as Albin, his first name?
I know, I couldn't find anything on that. Again, probably because it's Canada. But yeah, so people on the message boards are just like we are. They're, like, torn between, like, sympathizing with him and, like, being mad at him for what he did to his family. Because it's horrible.
Of course.
Wow. What a...
And I was like, I'm willing to believe it was a rash decision, but it couldn't have been too rash because he did fully stage a scene that made it look like he fell in the river attempting to fish.
Yes.
On the side of the road.
That's, like, super fucked up.
Well, did he? How did he stage it?
So, yes, this was a discussion online, too, and it was the Cars 1986 that was like, are you kidding me? He parked his car right by the river. He put a tackle box on the seat. He locked the car. I mean, it all led to, like, that idea he was just missing. There was one more thing I did want to mention was that I found a Reddit thread where somebody was like, Albin Arsenault is D.B. Cooper.
Oh my gosh.
Because both of the names he used were Cooper last name. Like, the area he was in, you know, because Canada right there, like, coming down, the timing.
He would sort of look like him, too, with the sunglasses.
He kind of looks like that picture. Mm-hmm.
Oh, my gosh, I love it.
I love that.
Yeah, and the guy was just like, has anybody ever looked at a Canadian for this? Like, we've always looked at Americans, but like, have we thought about Canadians?
Oh my gosh.
So I thought that was a cool little side tangent.
That's super fun.
Yeah.
Ah, what a great segment. Nice job.
Yeah, good job.
Yeah, such a weird one, but I'm really glad it ended in a happy ending.
Me too.
What are we feeling and sharing this week? I have a similar one to Alison.
A similar one?
On this document. Well, the same one.
Oh,
but I have a different one too.
Well, let's do both of them.
Yeah, okay. Alison will tell you about hers. Another one, a podcast I've been listening to and finished is called Stolen. And the whole series is on Spotify. It is hosted by Connie Walker, who did Missing and Murdered for CBC.
Oh.
About missing and murdered Indigenous women in Canada. But then I think one of them ended up down in the United States for something in that series. I think something with an adoption. But anyway, it's been a while since I listened to that one, but she's a great journalist. And the podcast is called Stolen, The Search for Jermaine. It's a Gimlet podcast, and just about a young Indigenous woman and mother named Jermaine Charlo in Missoula, Montana, who was last seen at a bar and then has never been found from 2018. And you get to hear interviews with her family. One of the people they interview is actually the sister-in-law, I believe, of Selena Not Afraid, who I did a Patreon episode about. Right. And she had just gone missing in that part of the country, just talking about like what an epidemic it is for women in this culture for a few reasons. Like abuse is really rampant, can be rampant in the culture, and then they don't get a lot of support, and the men don't have a lot of support, and of course but then trafficking is also a really big concern in the area, especially Montana is like one of the number one trafficking states.
Wow.
So they're just facing like this horrible, it's really dangerous to be an Indigenous woman. It's really sad. So the podcast is really sad, but really good. And Connie Walker is an amazing host and researcher and journalist. So
cool.
It's all on. You can listen to the first episode on anything, but then you have to listen to the rest on Spotify.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then my recommendation, that was also going to be Eliza's recommendation, is a podcast by Wondery, of course.
Who we love.
I mean, I don't think they've ever done anything I didn't like. So it's called In God We Lust. And the synopsis is a luxury hotel pool attendant in Miami meets a married couple. The wife starts flirting with the young man, and pretty soon he is caught up in a love triangle, one that will have far-reaching results. The husband is Jerry Falwell Jr., member of one of the most famous evangelical families in America and president of a Christian university with a strict code of conduct. The affair is part of a pattern of questionable behavior that will threaten the Falwell family dynasty.
It is crazy.
So good. It is like just gossip, gossip, gossip. It's so bananas.
Fucking assholes.
Oh my gosh. The hypocrisy is astonishing.
Well, and people might know who he is because I think it was last year or the year before when all this stuff came out that I didn't know about. There was a picture going around of him, this Jerry Falwell Jr. guy, with a woman who was not his wife, and her pants were unbuttoned. Do you guys remember this?
No. I recognize this name, but I don't remember that picture.
Yeah. Liberty University is really
strict.
Religiously conservative.
Yeah. So, like, there's this huge code of conduct, and then the guy that's running the place is basically doing whatever he wants.
Yeah.
There's an interview, and one of the students talks about seeing him drunk on campus. And so the hypocrisy is just sort of like, chef's kiss. Chef's kiss.
Yikes, yikes, yikes.
And then, of course, like getting dragged, 1-star reviews from people who are like, oh, just another liberal media bashing Christians. I'm like, listen, If you can't understand that there are imperfect people in every religion, I do not know what to tell you.
Yeah.
You've got to really get right with that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So yeah.
It's good. People should listen.
It's a really fun listen. It really is.
And those, I should say, I listen to the podcast Even the Rich, which is hosted by the same two women. And I don't listen to every series, but they have one on the Royals. They have a series on Beyonce and Jay-Z. And so they'll do like 4-episode deep dives about these like rich families.
Oh, fun.
And yeah, it's good. The Beyonce and Jay-Z one was great, of course.
Cool.
Ooh. Mine's kind of like carryover from last week, but it's just vaccine appreciation.
Every episode, we love it.
I just am so excited. Like, I get my second dose next week, and it's just a big deal. And I was just talking with a coworker because we had both been to the convention center with someone else getting theirs. And we were just talking about like how in awe we are of like all that has had to happen to make this happen, and that it's really happening now, and just like watching history go down in front of our faces is so cool. And I don't know. I'm just really happy that it's happening.
Yeah.
Also, Eliza will be really excited to know that we finally started watching Veep.
Oh,
I know you love
you're
it, honey.
kidding. I love it. Do you love it?
Yeah, I'm loving it now. I wasn't convinced at first because always
Yeah.
at the beginning of something, you're like,
Yeah.
But yeah, it's really good. It's super funny. And
Oh, it's so funny.
at first
wish
I was
could
like
watch it again
disgusted
the
by
first
everyone.
time.
And then I was like, oh, that's
Oh,
kind of
yeah.
the point. Like,
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. You hate everyone,
Yeah.
and it's delightful.
yeah. And she's just so funny.
I know. She's amazing.
She's incredible.
Yeah.
She really is.
Yeah. So
Good. I'm proud of you. So
Thank
proud
you.
of
Thank you.
you. Okay, what are we talking about? Oh my gosh. Already the season's flying by. Next episode's episode 3.
I know. We're almost done with season 4 already.
We're almost finished with the whole podcast.
We're almost a third of the way to being done with the podcast.
Well, are you guys noticing, though, there is a shift in this season where the updates are...
Totally.
There's much more effort put into the update. Sometimes it's a fully filmed segment. If
I
it's
know.
not a fully filmed segment, it's a lot more information.
What are you trying to say, Karlin? That we're obsolete now? That we're no
No.
longer needed?
Hopefully
not
that just
needed.
means our jobs are getting easier, right?
Yes. The reenactment filmings are also directed differently and using different camera filters. Kind of like we talked about with that one bank. I think it was a bank robbery where the guy that worked at the bank stole all the money. But like, I don't know what to call this filter or type of filming, but it's just sometimes feels different, feels more like a Forensic Files. You just see them playing with different like 90s, I don't know, ways of
Production.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Even the update screen is different now.
Yeah. The graphics.
Oh, our little show is growing
It's growing up.
Oh, what's happening?
So nice.
Okay. What are we talking about in Ep 3?
I go first. I have a doozy of a first segment.
Did you think
It has.
we'd see the amnesia segments again?
You know, I just love to hate an amnesia segment. I love them.
Especially this one. It like seriously, people should watch this
Honey.
segment if you don't normally watch.
It is a dream.
So good.
I know.
We'll
talk about
get to it.
But yeah, so the segment is titled Tyler because obviously the man can't remember his name.
And then we have a wanted segment about Joseph Maloney.
And I mentioned that I've got 2 legends in a row. This is actually called an unexplained segment about the Shroud of Turin.
I'm excited. I've heard a lot about this over the years.
Have you? I had never.
Yes. Oh, honey.
Really? You've never?
No.
Oh my God. I know a lot about it too.
What?
And I don't know anything about that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
I've heard about a lot.
I was
a
trying
lot
to
about it.
decide if I had ever heard anything about it at church. I don't think so, but...
See, that's the thing. It's like so much of this relic stuff.
That's Catholic, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
A lot of it, yeah. And also just, I don't know, even when you grow up in the world, it's like so many people believe so many different things within that world, too, that I never had heard about it.
Cool. And then I wrap it up with an unexplained death of Ethel Kidd, and it's pretty brutal.
Oh, gosh, yeah.
So,
Okay, so our review campaign is working. Just kidding. You can cut that out.
no,
But use True Sweeties. You're leaving these nice reviews. We appreciate it so much.
You from Chicago? Use True Sweeties.
Use,
guys.
I'll have a character for when I read the reviews. It'll be a whole fourth person.
I love it.
I'll read a few of these that we've been getting, but thank you so much to everyone who's read or who has left reviews. We wish that we could read them all, but know that we do read all of them in our little heads. So, Healthily Addicted is the subject line of this one, left by Mikkel, M-E-S-T, Mikkelest. I've been listening to my 3 friends. Aww. We've never met, but I'm sure we'd be instant BFFs since almost the beginning. This is the podcast that I look forward to the most in my week. I save it for a time with no interruptions and when I can seriously laugh out loud without someone looking at me. You 3 are just getting better and better, which I think means you can never end this gem of a show. Your in-related sister from Utah, Mikkel.
Oh, so nice.
The nicest.
So nice.
Thank you, Mikkel.
Thank you. And then, subject line 5 stars. I love this podcast, and I paused before the Edgar Casey segment to write this review because I live to follow directions.
Same, honey.
Good job. I loved Unsolved Mysteries as a kid, and listening to Resolved Mysteries is like having a conversation with my besties about each segment. The hosts have a great rapport, and they bring wit and snark to boot. I also appreciate that they use their platform to speak out on social justice issues and to raise funds for nonprofits. Karlin, Alison, and Eliza are total sweeties. Keep up the good work.
Aww,
and that's by A.E. Mitch. With an E at the end. So thank you.
Thank you
True
so
honeys.
much.
Again, there are so many, and we could read a lot more. And we will continue to do this every once in a while on the podcast at the end of episodes. But we do want you to know how much it means to us that you take the time to leave these reviews.
Oh my gosh. When people tell us that we feel like they're friends, it literally just warms my heart so much.
I know.
Yeah, because that's my favorite podcasts.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like if I met them, I'd be like, hey guys, what's up? Like, just like pick
Yes.
up conversation the last time they stopped talking.
I love it.
Yeah, let's talk about that episode. It was so good.
Yeah, and then people would quickly learn that I don't remember any of the episodes, so they should never come up to me and say that. Because I'll have nothing to talk to them about.
You know, it cracked me up even listening to when we recapped season 3, like going through each case. Even like halfway through the season, we're like, was that the one where
I know. I know.
there's so many cases.
Yeah.
There's
so many. Okay, so you can leave us a review, and don't forget that for every review that we receive, we donate $1 to a different organization, and this month's is National Asian Pacific American Women's Forum, so you can help us help them out by leaving a review if you haven't already. Another way to support the show is going to patreon.com/Resolved Mysteries Podcast. And if you subscribe at the $5 a month level or higher, you'll get ad-free episodes, 2 extra episodes a month, and other goodies. And to see photos we reference in the episode, follow us on Instagram at Resolved Mysteries Podcast and on Facebook and Twitter at Resolve the Pod. And you can contact us at resolvedmysteriespodcast.com, resolvedmysteriespodcast@gmail.com, or at our P.O. Box 14005, Portland, Oregon 97293. And you might want to contact us to send us stories so that we can read your stories on our listener short stack episodes. And you need to so we can keep making them. Mm-hmm. So email us or send us a letter with your favorite unsolved mystery story or just any nostalgia you have sitting on your grandma's bed watching the show. We love it.
That's nice.
We've had a few different people say that,
I know.
Specifically the memory of sitting on their grandma's bed. And you can just picture that very small TV in the corner of the room that you probably had to squint to see it.
Love it.
All right. We love ya. We'll see you for episode 3.
Yeah, we love you.
Yeah, we wait, we love you?
Yeah, we love you guys.
We do. I think it's clear by now. You know.
We love you so.
Okay, bye.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Whoa.
story or cold case.
Cold
cats. If you've got any cold cats.
You can send us your cold cuts, your cold cats, or your cold case stories.